All right, yeah, so as I said before, welcome to Ambient. I'm very happy that so many people turned up. Also, hello to roundabout, I think we've hit 1 million live viewers at this point. I think we're live streaming on Twitch as well. Welcome to you guys as well. I'm very happy that you're all here and that this worked. So yeah, this is my presentation. I'll tell you something about the Django-viewflow package today. This is going to be what I will talk about. First of all, I'll give a brief introduction to myself. Who am I? Then we'll talk about the Django-viewflow package. Then I will explain how we can use the package with Django, since this is a Django meetup after all. Finally, we'll discuss some drawbacks and advantages, and then we're already done and we can go back to our pizza. To all the live stream viewers, we've ordered pizza, so maybe that's an incentive for you to join us at our next convention, should it happen, at our next meetup. So yeah, who am I? First of all, servus, as they say in my country. Yeah, I'm Chris, I'm 24 years old. I've been in Cologne since 2015, and I've been working at Ambient since September 2019. I grew up in Luxembourg, but I am Austrian. So that's quite a wild mix. What's really important to me is that please do not confuse Luxembourg with the Netherlands. The Luxembourgish flag has a lighter blue than the Netherlands, so that's important. Okay, we are currently voting on changing the flag, but it's a process. It takes quite a time. Yeah, who are we? We are Ambient, obviously. We focus on web apps, and our weapons of choice are Django for the backend and React in frontend, but we also decided to use some new technologies just to kind of try ourselves and find new things and maybe dive into new frameworks, new subjects. So for example, we've recently had a project where we used Vue. So yeah, we're just trying to find what we really like and what works best for us. As the people who've joined us live can see that we have a really fancy office here in Cologne-Ehrenfeld. Remote work is possible, so home office became quite a thing, and it's definitely not a problem with us. And if you know someone who knows someone who knows someone who knows someone, we're hiring, so maybe. Okay, so what exactly is Django-viewflow? What am I talking about today? So Django-viewflow itself is based on BPMN. Maybe some of you have already heard this before. Maybe if you studied something that had to do with economics. BPMN stands for Business Process Model Notation. And this package mainly aims to bridge the gap between the software specifications and the needs of the client with the working solution. Here to your right, you can see the small definition that the author himself wrote, who said that viewflow is a lightweight, reusable workflow library that helps to organize people, collaboration, business logic in Django applications, which is basically what I just mentioned. This is BPMN for people who have never seen it before. So basically, this models a business process, a typical business process. It has a defined start and end. As you can see, it starts to the very left, good to ship, and it ends at the bottom right. What can we see here? For us techies, we see an AND gate, a so-called AND gate. That's the big plus. So that means basically that the process goes in both directions. Both lanes happen. Then following that AND gate, we have a so-called exclusive OR. So that means that we have to decide for one direction. We can go either up or continue right. If we go up, we have an inclusive OR, or just a simple OR gate, which means that, as you can say, as I have written on this arrow here, always happens always, so we always have to fill in a post label, but we can further decide to pick out the extra insurance, take out the extra insurance, and then at the end everything comes back together. We have to add the paperwork, and then the process is done. So this is BPMN. This could be something that the client comes to us with and says, okay, this is the process that I have in mind. How exactly would you code this? How can I present this on my website? What do we do with it? How can we work with this? That is what Django-viewflow basically takes care of. Django-viewflow, what it does is it adds finite state machines to our code. Maybe some of you have already heard this before. Finite state machines, or in German, endliche Automaten, they're very similar to BPMN. What they do is they have a finite number of states, and each arrow is a so-called transition, and they can always be only in one state. There is no possibility to be in multiple states. One state can lead to another via a transition. So for example, from the state ready to publish, we can pick the transition publish, and then we end up in the final state, which is published. But from that, we could also go back and retract. But what's also important to notice is that a state can also transition to itself. Yeah, on the right side, we can see the brief Wikipedia definition. So, how exactly can we translate this? What are the similarities? How can we use this? Here we can see our BPMN example back again. This would be the finite state machine for it. As you can see, it's not as bloated, it's not as big, but we do have some kind of a loop here, or at least some kind of decision to take, which is basically, I think it was normal post. Okay, it was our exclusive OR. All the steps before that, for example, the first step, the big plus, the AND gate, how would we display this in our finite state machine? Well, it has to happen either way. There is no chance for us in a finite state machine to display that we have to take two routes and that they have to happen at a similar time. So it has to happen either way. That's why I moved the package goods step, which is at the very bottom in the bottom lane. That's why I moved the package goods to the very end of the finite state machine. As you can see, it happens after the document's ready for packaging step. Okay, but why do we still have to make this decision after ready for shipping? Well, that's our exclusive OR. Because at that point we have to decide, okay, which direction do we want to go? Do we want to go direction special carrier, or do we want to go direction normal post? If we decide to go for, I think it was normal post, so that is the arrow that branches off at the top, we arrive at the state insurance check, and then we have the option of performing this loop, which is take out extra insurance, which just ends up in the state that we had before, which is basically what we can see in our BPMN at the inclusive OR. So that's the one with the big O, where we have the chance of either taking out the extra insurance, but in any case, we have to always fill in a post label. And that's what will still happen here in this transition, if you look at insurance check transitioning to documents ready for packaging. Yeah, and then at the end we package the goods, they're ready for pick area, and then we add the paperwork, and then we're done. So that's basically the translation of a BPMN to a finite state machine. Are there any questions so far? Because this is all introduction. Yeah, Birkan.
Are we talking about like web pages, or are we talking about some processes?
Okay, so for the live viewers, the question was if we're because I'm not sure if you really understood him well. The question was if we're talking about live websites, was it?
Yeah, are we talking about like flow of the web pages, or like data flow between processes?
Okay, the question was if we're talking about live data flow or the data flow between processes. What this basically describes, or what we're talking about, is the flow of, in the Django context, of specific models. So for example, in the project that I'm working on, we have so-called contracts, and they can have multiple states. If you create a contract, you have the state open, then maybe an invoice is generated, and you have you could have the state paid. Maybe you cancel the invoice, then your contract could enter the status cancelled, and that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the states that that an object could have, but you could make it to be anything else. Depends on you, depends on the programmer. But we're not talking about websites. This is not website, some kind of maybe user flow, for example. We're talking about objects here. Okay, so how does the django-viewflow package, how does it play into this, what does it do, what does it enable us to do. First of all, some keywords that we're going to hear quite a lot on these next slides. We're going to talk about transitions, we're going to talk about stages and flows. I will explicitly explain transitions and flows. Stage, however, I will not explain because stage is kind of the part of everything. Stage plays a part in everything. What you could take stage to be is status. Stage is, in the end, is nothing else than a status. So, transitions. What does this package give us? So we have these decorators that we can add to our functions, which would be a transition here, for example, and in those transitions you can have sources and you can have targets. On here, as you can see, sources, they can be either a list, a tuple, or a set. So for example, our status, as I had them in my example before, could be open, or in this case new, and then you could have a status such as paid or cancelled or I don't know, hidden maybe, or done even. And in the source you can define, okay, which statuses do we want to come from. So in this first example, in the cancel method, we say, okay, you can cancel our object if it is in the status new or in the status done. And then at the end you define a target, so after the transition has happened, the object should be in status cancelled. But the package gives us this special source, which is the any option, where, as the name suggests, you can just simply define, okay, I will allow this operation, this transition, from any status, coming from any source. Yeah, as I already mentioned, we also have targets. Targets can either be a single value or empty. So as you can see in the first example, we have no target defined, which basically means this could be like a side effect to our objects. So we just say, okay, if our object is in the status new, then we can call this transition, we can call notify, and then in this case an email will be sent, but the status does not change. There is no target. Since target only allows a single value, we can sadly not do something as we did in sources, where we had either a list, a tuple, or a set. So if we, for example, want to toggle, as you can see at the bottom, we defined a source which is new, for example, and then we say, okay, and once we toggled this, we will end up in the status done. But then if we want to toggle it back, we have to define an extra, we have to write an extra decorator, which says, okay, source is done, and then we end in new, since we cannot have multiple values for a target. All right, so now we've talked about sources and targets. What more can we do with transitions? We have conditions. Obviously, they, as per the documentation, should not have any side effects. They are simple functions which return a Boolean, so either true or false, and can be added to the decorator as seen at the bottom. We also have permissions, and there, luckily, we have multiple ways of implementing them. We can either, as we can see on the left at the top, we can either implement them using a lambda function, or similar to the conditions, pass in a function which will then return a Boolean value, either true or false. But one drawback from this would be that if I call the transition and I do not have the permission, an exception is raised, everything fails, I get a hard 500 error code, and everything crashes. So before I call my transition, I can also ask, okay, do I have the permission? As you can see on the right, I can just simply check if I have the permission and then handle that error or raise an error myself. Okay. One important thing to notice about transitions is that the state change actually happens before the function call. So what that means is, as we can see here in the pay transition, I've defined a source which is new, so I only want to accept a state change if my object is in status new, and the target should be in process. So whenever I call this transition, and when the code arrives at the self-perform payment step, my object is already in status in process. That transition has already happened, but now the code is only executing, which allows me to chain my transitions. So I can say, okay, my transition pay includes the perform payment and the payment error transition. In the perform payment, as you can see in my source, I only allow objects that are in state in process, and they will be sent to status done. But should an error happen, the second transition is being called, which will send my object into state error. And also, this transition also only accepts sources in process.
Did you just say if the if perform payment is executed, the transition happens before that, so the state would be done already, or if an exception is raised, the transition is already rolled back? Because if the state transition would happen before perform payment would be executed, it would be in the state done. And then
exactly.
If you handle the error, it only accepts.
Then the state change is rolled back.
Okay. Exceptions are already rolled back.
Handled, and they will roll back the state change. Okay, so again, I'm not sure if the live performance heard the question. The question was if an exception happens in perform payment, as I say on this slide, the state change happens before the execution of the code. In perform payment, I would already be done. I would already be in status done. What happens if I run into an error and an exception is raised? Because then payment error would not allow my object to happen because the source is not in process anymore, but instead is in status done. The answer to this was that any exception or any error reverts the state change. So if we are in perform payment, the status change has happened, an exception occurs, we roll back to in process, and hence payment error allows the transition change. Okay, so we've heard a lot about transitions now. We've talked about sources, we've had targets, and we've had the stage, which is the status. How do we use all this? How does this all come together? Well, for this, the Django-viewflow package needs a flow class. So this is an exemplary workflow. In this flow, we define our state. For this, we import state from the viewflow package. We pass our stage, which in this case is our status, to it, and define a default state, which basically means once the flow is instantiated, our object has a state of new. And then below this, you can see our transitions, where we define some sources and some targets. And then at the very bottom, you can see how we would call this. How would we execute this? How would we use these transitions? So first of all, we have to instantiate our flow. We can perform basic logic operations on our flow, so we can check, okay, what stage are we currently in? And then if we were to directly assign a new state to our flow, we would raise an attribute error, because we do not want that to happen. We want to call our transitions, because in our transitions we might have some side effects, such as sending emails, creating new objects. So a direct direct assignment, thank you very much. Direct assignment is not possible. But okay, how would we call it such a transition? Well, as you can see, we just call the complete transition on the flow object. And then after that, you can see, okay, if we now check for the status, if we now check for the stage, it is actually in status done. If we were to call the complete transition again, we would raise a custom error, the transition not allowed exception, because we're not in the correct status anymore. We are now in status done, I think it is, yes it is, and not in status new anymore. Okay, so that's basically the package. What does this have to do with Django so far? We haven't really mentioned Django, we haven't talked about Django. In Django, everything starts the way we know it. We have our models pi, we define our model there. This example, our model is a report, which has the two fields text and status. Status is a report status choices. Yeah, it's a simple choice field. And then in our Django app, we have a flows.py, which is the flow that we've just seen before, but using it with Django adds 4 more methods, which we always have to implement. First of all, a kind of instructor where we just set our object to be a class attribute. Then we have a setter and a getter for the status. And finally, we have a on-transition success method, which is kind of a hook, which is called after a transition has happened, where custom code could happen. In this case, our object is being saved. We don't necessarily have to save it, although obviously if we don't save it, we lose the transition. But we can also have some different code execute here. The getters and setters, however, I haven't experimented with. So obviously we have used this package in our project, but in there we haven't experimented with setters and getters. But this is basically what the flows.py would look like. And then beneath these methods, we would have our normal transitions that I talked about before. And that's how we would use this with Django models. So very simple, actually. We don't need to change anything on our model. All we have to do is implement this flows.py, and then whenever we want a status change to happen to our object, we just need to instantiate the flow, call a transition, and then that's it. All right, what are some drawbacks to this package? Well, first of all, which we were not very happy to learn, is changes of our status field are still possible. We can still directly assign a new status and then save the model, and then that's it. And then we've changed the status without having called the transitions, so our side effects have not triggered, our emails weren't being sent, invoices weren't generated. Doesn't really solve our problem. What did we do? We decided to write a mix-in for this, which I will talk about on the next slide. But yeah, we decided to write a mix-in for this. If you're not up for the mix-in, then yeah, you just have to remember to always instantiate the flow and use the flow. Another drawback is the documentation, because sadly, and this kind of plays together with the third drawback, this finite state machine part of the viewflow package is only available in a current pre-release version. It has not been released yet, so hence the documentation lacks at some points, but we were able to implement this package in our project, and to be honest, who reads documentation anyway, right? As we were able to use it, in the end we can all read code and we can all see, okay, how has this guy tried to implement the viewflow package, so we were able to use it. Yeah, this is the mix-in that I mentioned. Looks like quite a lot, is actually not. If you have any questions about this, we can definitely talk about it afterwards. I'll just fly over it briefly. In the end, what we do, we wrote a mix-in, obviously, which inherits from the typical Django models. And what it does is on every init, it checks, okay, in our protected fields, which is an attribute that we set on our model class. So in this example, on the report class that I've used before, what are our protected fields? We store the values for those fields. So in our case, the protected fields would be status, obviously, because that's the field that we don't want to change, or don't want to be able to change via direct assignment. We store the values in our original values attribute, and then on every save, we check whether the save method has been called from the flow. Because as you might remember, in our flows, we have this hook, I called it, which was called on-transition success, where we saved our object. And in this save call, we, in our project, decided to pass the keyword argument descriptor. In the end, you can decide to pass any keyword argument you want, and all we do is we just check for its existence. And if our object was not called from the flow, then we verify or assert that our status field, also our protected field, has not been changed. Because if it has, we raise our validation error. But if you remember, our report model had a field which was text. If we were to change the text field and then call save, this mixin would still allow the save because we have not changed the status. So it doesn't matter that the transition didn't happen. But yeah, if we were called from the flow, then we just super save and store the changed status in our new original values. And in the end, that was our mixin, which helped us to always remember to instantiate a flow and use the flow. Okay, so what are some advantages? Well, first of all, the side effects become more transparent. That is actually the main reason why we decided to use this package. As you all know, Django has these signals, and we decided to go crazy on signals. We had pre-saves and post-saves, and we have so many different models, and then we had all these side effects where if we, for example, saved an order, then the post-save would generate an invoice, but if the invoice is being saved, the pre-save of the invoice sends an email, and everything went crazy. We had emails being sent or emails not being sent. We had no idea why. We had no idea where to look. But with this, using flows and using these transitions, all these side effects become much more transparent, because we, at any point in the code where we change status, or any protected field for that matter, we know where to look, because we had to instantiate the flow. So in any case, we can always look into the flow, see all the transitions, see what is possible, which is also really helpful for new developers starting on a project, because they can already see, okay, what do we expect of our objects to have and to do. Yeah, this is actually what we can see as the second bullet point. We have a clear definition. And obviously, with the use of our mixin, no random state changes can happen anymore. But obviously, which is the main reason that I mentioned this package and that I am talking about this package tonight, is the collaboration between our clients and between us as developers becomes much easier, because most of our clients mostly know BPMN. Even if they don't, in my opinion, it wasn't too difficult to understand. We can then go and translate the BPMN into a finite state machine, and that is what the package is there for, and then we can just simply translate that into code. So hence the collaboration becomes much more easier and much more effective. That's already it. We made it. We made it.